I'm Claire Baldwin, 34 years old, and the day I pulled into my grandfather's gravel driveway, the porch light hit just right, and for a second it felt like he might step out, wave like always, and call me his girl, but the porch had a new nameplate. It wasn't Baldwin anymore, it was Langford. And when I reached under the ceramic frog for the spare key and found it still there, part of me hoped maybe this was all a mistake, but the smell inside said otherwise. Lavender oil and something cold and sterile, like a house waiting to forget. I hadn't even unpacked before I realized everything had already changed. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from and tap that follow button. If you've ever come back home only to realize someone else rewrote the story without you. My name is Claire, and I'm a public school librarian outside Austin. Grew up just a few miles from here, raised on honesty, decaf iced tea, and the kind of small kindnesses that don't make headlines but matter anyway. My mom, Vera, always dressed like the preacher's wife, even on a Tuesday. My dad, Russell, worked construction until his knees gave out. Grandpa Walt was the one who read to me at night, taught me how to paint a picket fence, how to recognize a lie dressed up in manners. He lived in that house nearly 50 years. Every Thanksgiving, every school break, every time I had a scrape or a bad grade, I'd be there. It was the one place nobody rushed me to speak to fix anything to smile when I didn't feel like it. He used to say, "A house is only as strong as it's quiet." So when he got sick last year, I came by more often. Brought him his favorite cobbler, read the mail aloud. I didn't ask for anything. But one night, sitting on the back porch under a dying bug light, he said the house would be mine. Not in a dramatic way, just simple, like he was handing me something he'd been saving a long time. When he passed that spring, I let the funeral arrangements fall to my parents. I didn't argue when Vera insisted on a closed casket, or when my cousin Bethany gave a speech that sounded like it came from a Hallmark card. I was tired, numb mostly. A week later, I drove back to the house. The mailbox said, Langford, now Bethany's last name. Inside, everything had been boxed up, labeled, neatly stacked, like a moving crew had come through with clipboards and no memory. Even my bedroom had been stripped, the mattress replaced. A box in the corner read, Claire Sort, later in handwriting that wasn't mine. I was halfway to the study when I heard her voice. "Oh, Claire, you're early." Vera stood in the hallway like she hadn't just buried her father the week before. Lipstick fresh, hair pinned tight. She walked past me and straightened a picture frame like we were discussing dinner plans. "Bethany's been staying here," she said. "We're getting things ready to list." My feet froze. "List?" "The house, honey." She smiled polite as church. "It's too much for you. Upkeep like this would drown you." I didn't answer. I just turned and walked toward the study. That was where Grandpa always kept his important papers, the will, notes, things he wanted remembered. The drawer I needed was locked, but my initials were carved faintly into the wood just beneath the handle. Claire M. Baldwin, not theirs, mine. And I knew in that moment something wasn't right. I walked into the living room and stopped just inside the doorway. The air felt different now, too quiet, like someone had turned the volume down on a place that used to hum with life. Boxes lined the walls, each labeled in handwriting that wasn't mine. Living room sort guest decor. Donate Grandpa's Books Review. One of them caught my eye. Claire Childhood Room. The marker looked rushed, like whoever wrote it didn't think I'd notice, or didn't care if I did. The couch was bare. Grandpa's old blanket, the one with the worn navy fringe, was gone. The photo of the two of us on his 75th birthday had been turned face down on the side table. I reached over and flipped it back up. There we were, arms around each other, him holding that ridiculous cupcake tower I made him. I barely had time to take it in before I heard the front door creak open behind me. Bethany breezed in like she owned the place. She wore soft-looking loungewear and carried a bag from a boutique in town. She didn't even look surprised to see me. "Oh, hey," she said, like we were running into each other at a coffee shop. "You're still here." Before I could answer, I heard the low murmur of my father's voice, then the tap of Vera's heels on the hardwood. They all filtered in, moving around the room like I wasn't standing there trying to breathe. "Claire," my dad said, offering a smile that didn't quite land. "We wanted to talk to you about everything now that you're here." Bethany sat on the arm of the couch, crossing her legs like it was her favorite seat in the house. Vera stood by the fireplace, smoothing the edge of a picture frame with one hand. I noticed she hadn't brought flowers to Grandpa's grave, but here she was, straightening wall decor like this was her living room. "We've already started the process," Vera said. "The house is going into escrow." The buyer's offer came in strong, well above asking. My mouth felt dry. "Escrow?" I asked. "What do you mean, escrow?" Vera folded her hands. "Closing is in about 10 days. The buyer will come by tomorrow for a walkthrough." I stared at her. "You sold it. It was too much for you, honey," Dad said, like he was explaining something gentle. "The taxes alone would have buried you. You've got your little apartment, your work. This place would have been a burden." Bethany let out a small laugh. "Seriously, Claire, you should be glad. No mortgage, no leaks, no stress. You dodged a bullet." I looked at all three of them, trying to understand if they believed what they were saying. My hands felt cold. Grandpa told me the house was mine. My mother glanced toward the folder sitting on the coffee table. "Well, verbal promises don't mean much when it comes to probate. He may have mentioned things in passing, but the property was held in the family trust. That gives us authority." I reached for the folder, flipping it open with slow fingers. It was a sales packet, thick with forms, signatures, closing dates. But something felt off. My name was on the last page, typed neatly above a signature line. Below it, a signature. My signature. Or it looked like it. I held it up. "I didn't sign this." Vera didn't blink. It was processed through the trust. "You didn't need to." "No," I said, my voice low. "This is my name, and that's not my handwriting." Vera let out a quiet sigh and sat down. "Claire, sweetheart, you've been under so much stress. I told them you might not handle this well." Bethany looked up from her phone. "You're making this into a whole thing. It's just a house." "It wasn't just a house," I said. "It was Grandpa's." "Grandpa belonged to all of us," Vera replied. "And this isn't about favoritism. It's about what makes sense." The air in the room shifted. My hands were still holding the folder, but the weight felt different now. I couldn't tell if it was disbelief or something heavier, maybe both. They weren't just being thoughtless. This wasn't accidental. Every step had been taken without me on purpose. They packed my things without asking, replaced the name on the mailbox, signed papers I'd never seen, and now they were telling me to be grateful. I walked out to the backyard. The honeysuckle was still blooming along the fence. Grandpa had planted it when I was 12. He always said it made the air smell like summer. I stood out there for a long time listening to the cicadas, letting the sun hit my arms. I didn't hear the laughter inside until the door opened behind me. Bethany was saying something about dinner reservations. Vera laughed. It didn't fit. None of it did. Later that night, after they'd all gone, I sat alone in the kitchen and checked my phone. Bethany had posted a photo. Grandpa's porch. Her caption read, "Some people care more about property than peace. Grandpa deserved better than drama." The comments rolled in fast. "Let the man rest. Family always shows their true colors. There's always one." I stared at the screen. They weren't just moving on. They were rewriting the whole story, and they were already casting me as the villain. I walked back into the study and went straight to the drawer. The lock hadn't been forced, not yet, but I didn't want to wait. I found the screwdriver in the kitchen drawer, the one Grandpa used to fix everything from loose hinges to bike pedals. I slipped it into the edge of the drawer and twisted. The wood splintered. Something inside me cracked with it. Inside was a single envelope, my name on the front in Grandpa's handwriting. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there holding it. Back at my apartment, I placed the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. His handwriting was steady, slanted, just like always. I finally opened it. There were 2 things inside a folded copy of his original will and a note written on yellow paper. Just one line: if they sold the house, check the signature and check the date. You weren't in town. I read it again, then a 3rd time. My hand shook as I pulled out the folder Vera had given me. I flipped back to the page with the signature. It looked perfect. My slanted M, the curve and the Baldwin. But it wasn't mine. The date said May 13th. I wasn't even in Texas that week. I pulled out my laptop and opened my calendar. The flight confirmation to Seattle. The librarian symposium. I still had the email with the panel invite. Even a photo from that week taken on stage. The signature was fake. The sale happened while I was out of state, and they had signed my name like I was already gone. That night around midnight, I picked up my phone and called Linda, a fellow librarian who had helped organize the symposium. She answered groggily. "Claire." "Everything okay? I'm sorry to call so late," I said, "but I need a favor." "Of course," she said, after a pause. "I need a letter confirming I was there, that I spoke at the panel on the 13th. I remember she said, 'You were great.'" I thanked her, hung up, and splashed cold water on my face. Then I remembered something else, the old family tablet Vera once synced to her cloud when I helped her recover a password. I hadn't touched it in months. I powered it on and opened the messaging app. It took time to scroll through, but I found them. A screenshot from Dad to someone named Edward. "We've got her. She won't contest. She's passive." Then a message from Vera. "She's always been the quiet one. That's why she's perfect." I took screenshots of both and emailed them to myself. They didn't just leave me out. They counted on me staying quiet. I labeled a new folder on my desktop. Truth. Inside, I dropped the will, the flight confirmation, the screenshots, and the forged contract. Then I sat back and stared at it. They had taken the house, but now I had the truth. I kept the envelope on my kitchen table for the rest of the night. Didn't move it, didn't put it away. I just left it sitting there under the soft hum of the overhead light like a witness. I couldn't bring myself to sleep, not really. I tried once lying down with a blanket pulled up around my shoulders, but every time I closed my eyes, the image of that forged signature came back the way my name curled at the end, just like I wrote it in 5th grade when Grandpa taught me cursive. Whoever had done it knew how I signed things, knew the angle of my M, the little loop I always put on the B. By sunrise, I was still in the same clothes, my mug of tea gone cold on the counter. I stood at the sink for a long time, staring out into the narrow alley behind my apartment, thinking about how quiet everything was. Not peaceful, just still like the world was waiting for something. I turned on my laptop again, opened the folder I'd labeled Truth, double-checked the flight confirmation from Seattle, the emails, the photo of me on stage with a lanyard around my neck, the forged sale agreement with the wrong date, the messages I'd found on Vera's old tablet. All of it was there, arranged carefully, like pieces of something I hadn't quite figured out how to build yet. Around mid-morning, I printed everything and tucked it into a file folder, the kind I used at school when I had to organize lesson plans. I grabbed the USB from my desk drawer and slid it into the pocket. The envelope from Grandpa, his will, his note went in last. I sat at the table staring at it all. I didn't know what my next move was supposed to be, but I knew this wasn't something I could keep to myself, not anymore. I picked up my phone and called Linda again. Her voice was clearer this time, more awake. "Claire," she said, "I sent that letter just like you asked. It's in your inbox now. I thanked her, told her I might need to follow up with a formal affidavit, and she didn't hesitate. "Just say the word," she said. After we hung up, I pulled open the hallway closet and stared up at the shelf where I kept the old family iPad. Vera had synced everything to it once when she locked herself out of her email. It hadn't been used in over a year, but I'd never thrown it out. I pulled it down, wiped the dust off the screen, and charged it. It took a while to boot up, but when it did, her messages were still there. I scrolled slowly, not sure what I was even looking for. And then I found it 2 messages that made my chest tighten. One from Dad to a man named Edward, whose name matched the buyer documents I'd seen. "We've got her. She won't contest. She's passive." And one from Vera to Dad. "She's always been the quiet one. That's why she's perfect." I read them twice, then took screenshots, emailed them to myself, and saved them to the USB. It wasn't just that they forged my signature. They had planned this, counted on me to stay silent. They had decided the house and everything it meant was better in someone else's hands because they didn't think I'd do anything about it. I placed the USB in my purse. Then I picked up the folder, grabbed my keys, and drove. The law office wasn't far, tucked between an insurance firm and a florist. The building looked plain from the outside, just beige stone, and a small brass plaque that read Martinez and Wyatt Family and Estate Law. I hadn't made an appointment. I just walked in steady but quiet and asked the receptionist if someone could see me. A few minutes later, a woman in a charcoal gray suit stepped into the waiting area. She had dark hair pulled back and held herself like someone who didn't raise her voice unless she had to. "I'm Skylar Martinez," she said. "You're Claire." I nodded and followed her back into an office that smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper. We sat across from each other and I placed the folder on her desk. "I think my family forged my signature to sell my grandfather's house," I said, "and I think he left a clause in his will to stop it." She opened the folder without a word, flipping through the document slowly. She held the will up to the light, narrowed her eyes at the handwritten note. When she reached the sales agreement, she paused. Then she turned the will around and pointed to a line I hadn't noticed. "This clause here," she said, tapping gently, "states that the house cannot be sold under any trust delegation or power of attorney unless you sign in person, witnessed by 2 adults not related to the family." She leaned back. "That clause overrides everything in the trust." My hands were still on my lap. "So, they can't sell it?" "Not legally," she said. "And if they forged your signature, that's criminal." It felt like something inside me clicked into place, like the floor had steadied again. Skylar stood and walked to the printer. "We'll file an emergency injunction to freeze the sale," she said. "That buys us time." "And the buyer," I asked, "Edward. If he knew he could be liable, if he didn't, we'll send him a letter today explaining the situation." I sat there a while longer while she assembled paperwork. She had a quiet way about her, focused, measured like someone who didn't need to raise her voice to move a mountain. By the time I left her office, the sun had started to dip again. I drove by Grandpa's house, parked out front, and sat there for a while. No one was home. The porch light was off. The blinds were drawn. I stepped out and walked up the steps, still creaky in the same old places. The spare key was still under the flower pot. I let myself in and stood just inside the doorway. The house didn't feel like it used to, not yet, but it wasn't theirs anymore. I walked to the hallway and stopped by the photo of me and Grandpa, the same one I'd found turned face down. I lifted it from the shelf and noticed the back felt thicker than it should have. I flipped it over. There were 4 tiny screws along the edge. I found the little screwdriver in the kitchen drawer and returned to the hallway. When I removed the back, I found a small brass key taped to the inside. I turned and looked around the room. Then my eyes landed on the fireplace. I stepped closer, scanning the wooden floor near the hearth. One board had a tiny heart etched into it, something I'd never noticed before. I knelt down and fit the key into the notch. The board gave with a soft groan, and underneath was a small fireproof box. I lifted it carefully, heart thudding in my chest. Inside was a folded letter, a USB drive wrapped in flannel, and an envelope labeled in Grandpa's handwriting, Ellis. The same Ellis who used to live 2 blocks over. The one Grandpa always said remembered everything. Birthdays, old phone numbers, the year the backyard willow finally stopped blooming. I placed everything gently into my bag. That night I barely slept again. But it wasn't the same kind of sleeplessness. It wasn't fear this time. It was something else. I was standing in my kitchen with the envelope marked Ellis in my hand when the morning light crept across the tile. The brass key from Grandpa's floorboard still sat on the counter beside the small fireproof box I'd found beneath the hearth. I hadn't opened the letter yet. Not fully. But the name on the outside was enough. Ellis Granger. 2 blocks over, lived in the same little yellow house since before I was born. Grandpa always said Ellis was the kind of neighbor who remembered things most people forgot. Who owed who $5, which years the willow tree bloomed early, which kids could be trusted with a ladder. I tucked the envelope and USB into my purse and drove over. His porch looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint on the railing had started to peel, but the wind chime and old tangle of bent spoons and fishing lures still clinked in the breeze, sounding just like it had when I was 7 and thought it was made of magic. I didn't even have to knock. The door creaked open, and there he stood. "Claire Baldwin," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "Took you long enough." I followed him inside. The house smelled like lemon balm and old books. He walked slowly but steady, and when we reached the kitchen table, he nodded to the seat across from him. Already on the table was a flash drive, a cassette tape, in a little plastic case, and a photograph. The photo stopped me cold. Me Grandpa and our dog Lucky, standing under the willow in the backyard. I must have been about 7 or 8, missing a front tooth, laughing like the whole world was mine. "He gave me all this last fall," Ellis said. "Told me not to hand it over unless you came asking." He pushed the cassette tape toward a small digital converter on the counter and clicked it on. A little static crackled. Then Grandpa's voice came through low and gravelly, but unmistakable. "They'll tear it apart, Ellis," he said, "piece by piece." Ellis's voice, softer, replied, "You've written the will." "It's not about paperwork," Grandpa answered. "It's about intention. Claire understands that. She always has." I sat still, hands in my lap. The recorder kept playing. "She won't fight for herself," Grandpa said, "but she'll fight for the meaning. That's why she's the keeper of the flame." I kept my eyes on the table. Couldn't look up just yet. Couldn't breathe right either. I hadn't known he saw me that way. Ellis didn't say anything for a long time, just let the recording run until it clicked off. Then he reached over and rested his hand over the flash drive. "He wanted you to have this too," he said. "Said it held backups of everything. Letters, copies of appraisals, audio notes, even some of his paintings scanned in case anything ever went missing." He placed the drive gently in my hand. "He knew something was coming," I said quietly. Ellis nodded. Didn't know what. Just that it would be loud and messy and not about what the house meant to him. I took the photo, too, tucked it into my bag. He said you were the only one who ever walked slow enough to notice what he planted out back. We made tea after that, sat for a while talking about little things, Grandpa's pancakes, the time he built a bird feeder that collapsed in the wind, the summer we dug a shallow pond that never held water, but somehow still attracted frogs. It was the first time in days I didn't feel like I was trying to stay upright. It felt like someone had remembered who I was before all this. Before I left, Ellis stopped me at the front door. He pulled something from the drawer near the coats and placed it in my hand. A small brass button from Grandpa's old work jacket. He carried it in his pocket those last few weeks, he said. Didn't say why. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's your compass. I drove straight home and spread everything out on my kitchen table. The recording, the photo, the original will, the Seattle flight confirmations, the forged signature copy, the texts from Vera and Dad. I opened a new document and started listing each item one by one, labeling them clearly. I didn't want there to be any confusion if this went to court. The flash drive Ellis gave me opened easily on my laptop. It was organized in folders Grandpa must have labeled himself. One was titled Paintings, Originals, another Letters Not Mailed, and one just said, If They Try. Inside that last folder was a series of scanned documents, proof of ownership for specific artworks in the house. A few handwritten notes, dates, and what looked like sketches of hiding places. The files were dated over a span of 6 years. He'd been preparing for this a long time. By the time evening rolled in, I was back at the house. The sun was starting to set behind the trees, casting long shadows across the porch. The key was still in my pocket. I stepped inside and went straight to Grandpa's study. Nothing had been moved since I was last there, but now I looked at the space differently. The photo frame with the hidden key, the drawer with my initials, the pattern in the rug near the fireplace. I walked to the wall and tapped gently along the floorboards until I found it again, the heart-shaped notch carved near the hearth. The key fit. The panel lifted. Inside was the fireproof box, just like before. This time I knew what I was looking at. The letter Grandpa had left was still inside. I read it again. If they try to erase you, go to Ellis. It didn't say to fight. It didn't say to win. It said, remember. I placed the new USB from Ellis inside the box next to the older one, sealed it again, and returned it beneath the floorboard. On the way out, I stopped by the photo shelf, straightened the picture of me and Grandpa. It still leaned a little to the left like it always had. I left the lights off when I locked the front door. Let the quiet settle back into the house. Let the house remember who still came home. Skylar had scheduled the meeting for 9:30. I pulled into the lot outside Sterling Properties at 9:20, parked beneath the shade of a crepe myrtle, and sat there for a moment. The building was clean and glassy with a polished metal sign out front and a set of double doors that looked more like a hotel lobby than a real estate office. Skylar was already waiting inside. She stood near the entrance with her briefcase in one hand and the envelope tucked under her arm. Her presence was steady, like a metronome in a quiet room. She nodded once when she saw me. "Ready?" she asked. I followed her in. The receptionist looked up from her monitor. "Do you have an appointment?" Skylar reached into her bag, withdrew the envelope, and slid it across the desk. "We do now," she said. "Please get Edward Jackson and your managing broker." The receptionist blinked eyes darting from the envelope to Skylar, then back to her screen. "Right away," she said. We were shown into a glass-walled meeting room with beige chairs and a long cherry wood table. The air smelled faintly of artificial lavender and something like fresh varnish. I sat across from Skylar folder resting on the table between us. A few minutes later, Edward Jackson walked in. Mid-40s, sharp haircut, dark navy suit. He had the polished smile of someone used to being believed. "Ms. Martinez," he said, offering a handshake. "I wasn't told there'd be legal representation." Skylar nodded once. "We thought it best to come prepared." His eyes flicked to me. "Claire, your mother said you were upset." Skylar opened the envelope, pulled out a document, and placed it in front of him. "This is a sworn affidavit from my client confirming she was out of state during the week of the alleged signature on the property sale." He scanned the page, then looked at me again. "She also said you were emotional, that you'd been struggling." Skylar didn't flinch. "What she said isn't evidence. What's in that folder is." She passed him the forged sale agreement, the photo from the symposium, the flight confirmations, and a printed email from the event organizer confirming I had spoken on the 13th, the exact day my name had supposedly been signed to the closing. Edward took a long breath and leaned back in his chair. "This signature," he said, "it looks identical." "But it isn't hers," Schuyler replied. "That's forgery. And what you attempted to purchase was stolen property." He rubbed the back of his neck, the confident tilt of his posture faltering. "I believed your mother. I took her word for it." Schuyler folded her hands. "You'll want to speak with your legal team. You'll also want to inform your title company that you nearly became complicit in a felony." He sat there for a beat too long, then pushed his chair back. "I'm withdrawing my offer," he said, "and I'll be speaking to internal counsel about this. Our firm will not be moving forward." Schuyler gave a quiet nod. "Good decision." By the time we walked out through the front lobby, word had already started to spread. I saw the receptionist glance at her phone and then quickly slip it into a drawer. On the screen just before it vanished, I caught Bethany's name, her contact photo bright against the background. Gossip moved fast. Faster when people smelled trouble. Outside, the sun was higher now, warm against the glass windows. Schuyler stood beside me as we walked toward our cars. "That was the easy part," she said. I knew she was right. That afternoon, I drove back to Grandpa's house. Bethany's Range Rover was parked halfway onto the curb trunk open. Vera's car was in the driveway. I let myself in. The living room was filled with cardboard boxes again. Vera stood by the fireplace wearing gloves and holding one of Grandpa's old pipe cases like it was a museum artifact. Bethany was snapping photos with her phone. "We're just documenting what needs to be relocated," Vera said, not bothering to look at me. I stepped further into the room. "You mean taken?" Bethany gave a tight laugh. "That's rich coming from you. Now suddenly you care about these dusty old things. They're not things I said, they're stories. And you're not touching another one." Vera lowered the pipe box. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "You were the ones who crossed the line." I turned to leave the room when something by the door caught my eye. One of Grandpa's paintings. A landscape of the Colorado Rockies. The one we hiked together the summer I turned 15. It looked right at first, but something felt off. I knelt beside it. The canvas was too smooth, the texture synthetic. Bethany rolled her eyes. "Please don't start playing detective." I didn't answer. I ran my hand along the edge of the frame and then pulled out my phone. I called Schuyler. "I need a favor," I said. "Bring someone who knows art." An hour later, she arrived with a woman named Lenore, retired museum registrar, quiet and direct. She examined the painting carefully, then looked up. "This is a reproduction," she said. "A very good one, but not original." Vera's voice sharpened. "That's impossible. That painting's been here for years." "Not this one," Lenore replied. I stepped back, breath tight in my chest. It wasn't about the house. It hadn't been for a while. They were stripping it from the inside, replacing originals with copies, turning Grandpa's life into liquid assets. I turned and walked toward the hallway. At the end was the attic hatch. I hadn't been up there since high school. I pulled the cord and climbed the old ladder, groaning beneath me. The air grew thick and musty the higher I went. Near the chimney wall, something metallic caught the light. A brushed steel safe tucked behind a loose board. No keyhole, just a keypad. I tried Grandpa's birthday. No. Then mine. Still wrong. Then I remembered the day we brought Lucky home. April 17th. I typed 0417. The lock clicked. Inside was a neat bundle, certificates of ownership appraisals stamped and dated, a flash drive wrapped in wax paper. There were letters from an insurance company confirming valuations. Grandpa hadn't just kept a few keepsakes. He had documented everything. At the bottom, folded carefully, was a short note in his handwriting. If they get desperate, they'll trade history for cash. Don't let them. These weren't collected for their worth, but for what they meant. You were the only one who saw that. I sat back against the attic wall, letting the dust settle around me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Skylar. She's filed a counterclaim, she said. Vera's alleging mental instability. That you forged the documents, not her. That Grandpa was manipulated. I didn't answer right away. She's also requesting a freeze on all proceedings, Skylar continued. But don't worry, we expected this. I closed my eyes for a moment. Let her try, I said. We've got the truth. I didn't sleep much the night after visiting Ellis. I stayed up sorting through folders, documents, drives, each item placed in order, like a puzzle I'd finally learned how to solve. By morning, I was dressed and out the door, before the sun had fully cleared the rooftops. The air was crisp, but not cold. I drove downtown with the windows cracked, my grandfather's will tucked beside me in the passenger seat like a quiet passenger. Skylar had arranged everything. The meeting was set for 9:30 at Sterling Properties. I arrived early, not because I wanted to seem eager, but because I needed a moment to catch my breath before stepping through those glass doors. Skylar was already inside. She stood just past the reception desk, calm and composed, in her slate-gray blazer briefcase in hand. She didn't speak until we were face to face. "This will make waves," she said. "But it starts here." The receptionist glanced up as we approached. "Can I help?" Skylar held out an envelope. "Please let Edward Jackson know his buyers are here to discuss a matter of legal urgency." The receptionist hesitated, then took the envelope and disappeared down the hall. We were shown to a small conference room, glass walls, polished wood table, leather chairs. It smelled faintly like lavender and something synthetic underneath. I sat beside Skylar, the folder marked Truth resting in my lap. A few minutes passed before Edward entered the room. He looked younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, with careful hair and a smile that faded a little when he saw Skylar's briefcase. "Ms. Martinez," he greeted, then turned to me. "Claire, I wasn't told you'd be bringing legal counsel." Skylar didn't flinch. "That's because this isn't a negotiation. It's a notice." Edward's brow creased slightly. He reached for a chair but didn't sit. I was informed by Claire's mother that she was overwhelmed by the probate process, that she'd agreed not to contest the trust's authority, that this was a family-managed matter. Skylar opened the file and pulled out the will. That would have been relevant if the trust wasn't explicitly overridden here. She tapped the clause with her index finger. "The house may not be sold under any delegation unless Claire signs in person witnessed." Edward blinked. He looked at me, then back at the document. "She never signed," Skylar said. "And on the date the document was forged, she was in Seattle speaking at a professional symposium." I opened my own folder and laid out the proof. The flight itinerary, the photos, the panel schedule. My name was printed on everything. Then Skylar added the signature page from the sale agreement and placed it side by side with a known copy of my handwriting. "Forgery," she said plainly. Edward exhaled slowly, his posture shifting. I assumed he started, but stopped. "You were told she was emotionally unfit," Skylar said, finishing it for him. "You were told she wouldn't fight, but you weren't told the truth." He stared down at the papers, no longer trying to argue, just listening. A long silence passed before he spoke again. "I'll be withdrawing the offer," he said, voice quiet, "and notifying the brokerage board." I had no idea this was happening behind her back. Skylar nodded once. "Good. You'll also want to alert your legal team that this transaction came dangerously close to criminal territory." Edward didn't argue. He simply gathered the copies, folded them carefully, and walked out without another word. Back in the parking lot, I stood beside Skylar before we went our separate ways. That was the first domino, she said, but not the last. She didn't need to explain. I knew what was coming. That afternoon, I drove back to Grandpa's house. The driveway was full again. Vera's sedan crooked along the edge Bethany's SUV parked with the trunk open. Boxes cluttered the walkway marked in neat handwriting, "Kitchen Pack Office Review Storage Keep." I walked inside without knocking. They were in the living room. Vera wore gloves white and spotless and held one of Grandpa's old wooden pipe boxes in both hands like it was something fragile and rare. Bethany was nearby snapping photos with her phone, pausing now and then to glance down at a clipboard. "We're just documenting what needs to be moved," Vera said, not even looking up. "You mean taken?" I said quietly. Bethany let out a small laugh. "You didn't care about any of this before. Now suddenly it's sacred." I walked toward the window, toward the painting that always hung beside the front door. It was a landscape Grandpa painted after our trip to Colorado. I stopped in front of it and reached up to touch the edge of the canvas. Something felt wrong. The texture wasn't right. The frame too clean. I stepped closer and ran my hand along the underside. Synthetic, not linen. I turned back to them. "This is a reproduction." Vera raised her chin. "That's the original. It's been in this house since the day it was finished." "No," I said. "It's not." I called Skylar. "I need someone who can tell the difference," I said. "Art authentication." Within the hour, she arrived with a retired museum registrar named Lenore. She was quiet, methodical. She examined the painting for nearly 10 minutes before speaking. "This isn't original," she said. "High-quality reproduction. Inkjet print on synthetic canvas." Bethany bristled. "That's not possible." "It's not just possible," Lenore said. "It's clear." I stepped back and looked around the room. The framed photographs, the antique books, Grandpa's tools, all suddenly cast in doubt. It wasn't about preserving his memory. It was about liquidating it. I didn't wait for their explanation. I walked toward the hallway, pulled the attic ladder down, and climbed into the warm, dusty air above. It smelled the same. Dry wood insulation time. I moved toward the chimney wall and found the panel just as before. The keypad blinked once as I entered the code. The latch gave. Inside the safe held a second flash drive wrapped in wax paper and a series of official documents, insurance records, letters of authenticity, handwritten notes, each detailing ownership and value. I sat cross-legged in the attic for a long time, reading, checking dates, rereading. At the bottom of the bundle was a note in Grandpa's script. "If they get desperate, they'll trade history for cash. Don't let them. These pieces weren't collected for worth, but for meaning. You saw that. They never did." Downstairs, my phone buzzed. "Skylar. Vera's filed a counterclaim," she said. "She's alleging undue influence instability, claims you forged the documents. She's requesting a freeze on all proceedings." I didn't respond right away. "We knew she might," Skylar added. I stared down at the safe, the flash drive, the records laid out before me. "Let her try," I said. "I've got the originals." I didn't go back to my apartment that night. I stayed at the house, my grandfather's house, and spread everything out on the dining room table. Appraisal letters, authenticity certificates, scanned images, the note from the safe. The flash drives each labeled in Grandpa's careful print. One of them contained copies of insurance claims dated from the past 5 years, each confirming the value of specific artworks and heirlooms. I opened the old laptop from the study and plugged in the newest drive. It booted slow the way Grandpa's machines always did, but once it loaded the folder, structure was precise backups of everything. Video logs, handwritten inventory scans, images of original paintings with time-stamped metadata. He hadn't just planned for someone to contest the will. He'd planned for what came next, people who would trade meaning for money. Around 10 p.m., I heard a car engine outside. I stood up, stepped quietly to the front window, and pulled the curtain just enough to see the street. A moving van idled at the curb. Behind it, Vera stepped out of a black SUV, followed by two men in dark suits. They carried briefcases. They weren't here to talk. I stepped back and crossed the room to the dining table. I picked up my phone, opened the recorder app, and pressed record. Then I set the phone face-down microphone angled toward the room. The door opened without a knock. Vera entered first. Her heels hit the floor like she was walking into a boardroom. The two men followed. One of them placed a folder on the table, its seal already broken. "This house was never just about you," Vera said. Her tone was flat, controlled. I opened the drawer at my side and pulled out my own folder. I laid each document on the table one by one. The appraisal sheets, the insurance letters, the signed reports authenticating the original artwork. "No," I said. "It was about the $2 million you were laundering through Grandpa's art." One of the men looked up from the file. The other stopped writing. Vera didn't move. The door opened again. This time someone knocked first. Edward Jackson stepped inside, no blazer, no briefcase. His posture different than before. Schuyler followed behind him, her case already open. Edward cleared his throat. "I wasn't told this would involve litigation. You're not being sued," Schuyler said. "But you should hear this." I walked to the console in the corner, plugged in the flash drive marked Final, and clicked the video file at the top. The screen lit up. Grandpa's face appeared older than I remembered, but clear-eyed. "If you're watching this," he said, "then they did exactly what I feared. They went after the house. They went after her. The room was silent. I left the truth in the walls. I left it for Claire because she was the only one who listened." Vera folded her arms. "Are we really letting a sentimental recording take the place of legal logic?" Schuyler didn't answer her. She opened her own file, pulled out color printouts of forged signatures. The Seattle itinerary, the texts between Vera and my father, and laid them down beside the appraisal documents. "We have forged authorization, coordinated asset swaps, and intent to defraud documented and preserved." Vera gave a quiet laugh. "Then play this," she said, tapping her iPad. She turned it around to face Edward. On the screen was an old video from a backyard cookout me in a blue dress holding a lemonade. "I wish I could walk away from this house," I said. She paused the video. "There you go." Straight from her mouth. "Play the full clip," Schuyler said. Vera hesitated, then tapped play again. But I promised him I wouldn't. My voice continued. "Not after everything he built here." The silence was heavier than before. I looked at Edward. "You weren't told the whole story." He nodded slowly. "No, I wasn't." He turned to Vera. "I won't be a part of this any longer." Vera's expression cracked. "We gave you life," she snapped. I looked at her. "And you tried to sell it back to me." That's when the red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Two officers stepped into the room, announced themselves, and began reading a warrant. Schuyler stood and gathered her papers. She didn't say anything to Vera, just looked at her once, then at me. "They're not here for me," she said. The rest of the night moved in pieces. Vera was led outside. The suits followed. Edward made a quiet exit. I stayed behind and collected the documents, placing each one back in the folder marked Truth. The recording was still running on my phone, quiet but steady. I stopped it and saved the file. Then I sat down at the table where everything had begun, where my parents and cousin had first told me the house was sold, where they'd smiled while packing my childhood into boxes. Only this time, the table belonged to me. The hearing took place in late April, nearly 4 months after the night the officers showed up at the house. By then, the frost had lifted from the yard, and the redbuds were starting to bloom behind the shed where Grandpa used to keep his lawn chairs. I stood outside the courthouse, smoothing the creases from my blazer, feeling the weight of the flash drives in my bag like coins sewn into the lining. Inside, everything was quieter than I expected. No press, no cameras, just a beige room with too much air conditioning and the steady sound of legal pads being flipped. Skylar sat beside me, organized as ever. Across the aisle, Vera kept her chin high. My father was there, too gray at the temples, and leaning slightly forward like he might speak, but hadn't yet decided how. Bethany didn't show. The case wasn't criminal yet. This hearing was about estate fraud, contested inheritance, and unlawful transfer of personal assets. We weren't seeking jail time, just truth. The judge reviewed the will, then the appraisal documents. Skylar presented the insurance filings. Then she played the video, Grandpa's recorded message clear and time-stamped. The room held still when his voice filled the air. The judge didn't interrupt. Neither did Vera. Next came the forged authorizations, the document transfers filed while I was out of state, the emails recovered from Edward's archive showing Vera's coordination with the appraiser she knew personally. The signature expert took the stand and confirmed what we already knew. My name had been lifted and replicated onto at least 3 key documents without my knowledge. Skylar didn't rush. She let each fact sit. Each name, each date. It added up like a ledger no one could erase. Vera's attorney asked for a recess. The judge granted it. 10 minutes only. In the hallway, Vera brushed past me. She didn't look angry, just tired. I heard her say to her lawyer, I didn't think she'd go this far. When we returned to the courtroom, Skylar handed the judge a signed statement from Edward, notarized the day before. In it, he admitted to witnessing the pressure placed on him to appraise family assets at inflated values and to submit sales documentation that bypassed the will's stipulations. The judge leaned back, took a breath, then read her decision. The will stood. All prior asset transfers executed without my consent were voided. The property deed was reinstated in my name, and a formal investigation would be opened to review potential charges of fraud and elder financial abuse. When the session ended, I didn't speak to anyone. I stepped out onto the courthouse steps and took in the early afternoon air. It smelled like paper and pavement and something clean underneath it all, like stone that had been waiting to be rinsed off. A week later, I received a letter from the estate office. The furniture had been returned, the valuables locked in storage, the house listed in my name. I went back that Sunday. The key turned smoothly. I opened the front door and let the breeze run through the hallway. The curtains moved like someone was still in the room. I walked into the study, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and slid out the last envelope Grandpa had left behind. It had one word written on it: trust. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no instructions, no passwords, just a photo of him and me on the back porch, me holding a book, him looking off at something only he could see. I placed the photo on the mantel next to the brass lamp with the cracked shade. Then I sat down at the table and started writing down everything, every letter date, name, and feeling I'd carried through the months. Not for a case file, not for a judge. I didn't move out right away. For a while, I stayed in the house mostly quiet, fixing little things that had been left undone. The porch railing had a loose spindle. The garden beds were overtaken with weeds. I trimmed everything back and planted marigolds along the walkway, just like my grandmother used to. Some afternoons, I'd sit out there with a cup of tea, listening to the breeze shift through the trees. No noise from courtrooms or attorneys. No echo of Vera's voice down the hallway. Just the sound of the house settling like it was learning to breathe again. Vera sent a letter in May. No apology, just a sentence or two saying she'd accepted the court's ruling and was moving to be closer to her daughter. I folded it once and tucked it into the back of the filing cabinet. I didn't feel anger, not anymore, just distance. A kind of quiet space where something used to be. I saw Edward one last time at the grocery store. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner through the shoulders. He nodded and kept walking. That was enough. Skylar moved on to another firm. Before she left, she dropped off a little wooden box for me, filled with labeled copies of every document neatly sorted. At the bottom was a note. "This time no one gets to rewrite your story." I kept the house for another year. Then I sold it carefully, deliberately, to a young family who reminded me a little of what we used to be, before everything frayed at the edges. They brought laughter back into the rooms. I think the house needed that. Now I live in a smaller place, 2 bedrooms, quiet street, close enough to walk to the library. I framed that old photo Grandpa left me and placed it on my desk. It's not a shrine, it's a reminder. Sometimes people ask why I didn't fight harder to stay connected to my family, to rebuild something with them. But I did fight, just not the way people expect. I fought to remember the truth. I fought for the quiet, steady dignity that my grandfather taught me, even when no one else was watching. And in the end, I didn't just get back a deed or a name on a document. I got back my voice, my peace. So if you've ever been pushed aside, if someone's tried to make you feel small in a place you once called home, know that you're not alone. And know that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand quietly and still be seen. Thanks for listening. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who's had to reclaim their place, feel free to share it with them too.